Alright, so for those of you who don't know, I've been trialing Toon Boom for the past few weeks. You get 3 weeks per trial, but I've only been doing Advanced and Premium, and I dropped my Advanced trial a week into it so I could switch to Premium, because Premium just offers that much more. So I've only had about 3 weeks in Toon Boom Harmony Premium. This is a video comparing Flash to Toon Boom, and it's meant to help you answer the question, should I transition from Flash to Toon Boom? Because I very regularly see people recommend Toon Boom as like it's superior to Flash in every single way, and that's quite frankly not true. Toon Boom is very unintuitive and very, very hard to learn. It's very, very powerful, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the most practical thing for you. So I'm going to try and describe the differences and what Toon Boom does offer and what you'd have to adjust to and what you have to get used to help you decide whether or not you should transition from Flash to Toon Boom. For the record, I use Flash CS6, and for the most part, I'm going to be assuming that you also know how to animate, and that you're pretty good at it at least. If you're still learning, there might be some things you have to just account for, and I'll try to cover those at the end, but for the most part, I'm just going to assume that you're capable of animating in Flash adequately. Therefore, it's fair to say that you should have high standards of what you expect from an animation program. So anyway, without further ado, let's get started. So one big incentive that most people switch over to Toon Boom for are the drawing tools. You might be aware that Flash's drawing tools, while they're straightforward, are a little bit wonky. The brush tool will add in random jags that need to be corrected, and if you draw inside a nested symbol at an angle, sometimes it'll actually destroy the line. It's weird. Toon Boom, by contrast, still does a little bit of post-correction here and there, like you won't always get exactly what you draw. However, it's nowhere near as bad as Flash. Another good example of this is the pencil tool, which in Flash, for some reason, it does it even worse. The pencil tool in Toon Boom, meanwhile, draws exactly like the brush does, and as another advantage, it actually has pressure sensitivity on its strokes. So if you want to have like a tapered outline or something, you can totally do that, and it's really easy. One thing that Flash does have over Toon Boom is that it actually has a smooth and curve optimization functions, which you can use to simplify or correct your artwork, and these tools wind up making up for a lot of the brush issues. Toon Boom has a smooth function as well. I haven't been able to find a curve optimization tool, but the smooth tool unfortunately treats every image as a max resolution image, so as a result, small works of art will wind up getting completely destroyed by the smooth function. So you can't basically use it on things like eyes, you have to use it on really big drawings. Fortunately, because the drawing tools are so much better in Toon Boom, you shouldn't have to do much post-correction. It even includes a transparent stroke tool for assisting with fills. Colors in Toon Boom, however, take some getting used to, and don't feel like they have a lot of freedom. In Harmony, you have to set up your palette and swatches before you can color. When you edit a swatch, it'll update any instances of it in the document in real time, which is actually insanely useful for doing recolors and character palettes and stuff like that. The downside is that it makes it a little bit of a pain to digitally paint. In Flash, if you want to paint something just like a background, it's pretty easy to do. You can just select your colors and go on. If you need to swap out a color, you can do that with Control F, which is a little bit clunkier, but you do have the ability to swap out colors in Flash still. The other advantage of Toon Boom swatches, however, is that it opens the door to complex rendering techniques, such as color masking. Ultimately, both programs have their perks and their drawbacks to their coloring systems. In some respects, I prefer Flashes, and in other respects, I prefer Toon Booms. It's really a toss-up. One other drawing element that Toon Boom also has is the ability to tint the onion skinning that you use. Additionally, onion skinning in Toon Boom can apply per layer, rather than requiring the entire document or requiring you to lock things. It's a nice bit of functionality, though from what I've heard, Animate CC has also added in tinted onion skinning, and you can even customize the colors, and it displays what color is what on the timeline itself. One major difference between Toon Boom and Flash, however, are the drawing layers in Toon Boom. Drawing layers in Toon Boom are not just a layer for data. They're a combination of a symbol and a layer in one, in a sense. Any drawings you make get stored in this corner down here in the library called drawing substitutions. Much like frames of a nested symbol in Flash, you can switch between these drawings at any time, and editing one will occur across all the instances of that drawing in that drawing layer. It sounds a little confusing. As a result, if you draw something in a drawing layer and have it extended so you have multiple frames of it, and then you delete a middle frame in it, and then start drawing something in between there, the two other frames on either side of it will actually be the same drawing, and making an edit to one will also update the drawing instance in the latter. You can also duplicate drawings within a layer using a single button press. It's kind of like making a new keyframe in Flash. You can even duplicate entire drawing layers so you have access to the same sets of drawings on a different layer. but they might be played in a different order and stuff. But adding additional drawings will still update for both layers. This is really useful if you're doing like hands or anything where you have two of them or multiple of them. All in all, it took me a while to wrap my head around it, and there's a few tricks to making sure you're actually editing the drawing you want and you don't wind up losing data. But once I understood it, it's about as functional as Flash's symbol management, and it's actually a pretty nice feature. So knowing how to do drawings and all is all useful if you do frame-by-frame stuff, but if you need to do motion and things like that, you actually can assign motion in Toon Boom to a thing called a peg layer instead. A peg layer will apply the movement, scaling, rotation, etc. to any layers below it. Pegs contain purely motion data. Drawings and even other pegs can be parented together, causing any motion to the parent peg to apply to all the child drawings and pegs themselves. Whereas a drawing may behave like a symbol, a peg behaves more like a symbol's nest. It's very similar to nesting functionally, except you can go much deeper. In Flash, you'll only want to nest things for organizational purposes, or if you need to keep them grouped together. And then if you do need to animate things individually, you have to go inside the nest or you have to break it down. In Toon Boom, the entirety of the nest applies to the main timeline instead. One main drawback to this is that it means any element is either parented to a peg or it's not, and this goes for the entirety of the file. You can't have one object acting as a child at one point, and then have it suddenly not acting as a child at another point. It has to be an all or nothing thing. If you want an item to suddenly stop being parented to another thing, you have to basically duplicate it and move it around. This all kind of comes from Toon Boom's approach of having everything on the timeline all at once. However, reordering layers isn't as big of a priority in Toon Boom. One huge, and I mean huge advantage that Toon Boom has over Flash is that it actually has a functioning Z-axis. Layer order will determine what displays first if two items are both in the same space. However, if an item moves forward and is in the same composition as another item, it'll display on top of it, even if the layer is below it. If you have something that you want to be in front, you can pull it forward. If you need it to go behind, just push it back. You don't need to shuffle the layers like you do in Flash. In Toon Boom, everything basically exists in 3D space. There's even a perspective angle for the camera that you can take to view this. All the drawings and stuff are still 2D cells, but they're positioned in 3D. To assist with this, Toon Boom actually has a built-in camera that you can use to record. It's optional, but it's something that Flash sorely lacks, though you can simulate it with ActionScript. It's a nice perk also because it has a bit of field of view, which you can use to simulate parallaxes much easier. The downside is that if you have a character with many parts that require a lot of 3D positioning, it might distort a bit of the display on some of those. Now both Flash and Toon Boom have libraries. However, Toon Boom's has a few major functional differences. Despite behaving like symbols, drawings aren't automatically saved to the library like they are in Flash. It will only save an item if you opt to save it, and it will save everything about the item, such as if you select a group. If you select a collapsed parent peg of a rig, for instance, it'll save all the layers, keyframes, drawings, etc. for the entire timeline to a single template. You can then import this later and even remove frames. Because remember, deleting a frame from a drawing layer doesn't actually remove the drawings that are present. It just removes their display. You can then use the utility called Pose Copier, which lets you copy and paste down specific frames from the original template onto your imported one. This is really useful for doing things like turnarounds and things like that. This all works because copying and pasting on the timeline in Toon Boom is a little bit different, as you can choose what data actually goes through. So I won't go too much into detail about it, but it's just something to remember that you can only paste one type of data into a similar type of data. You can't paste a keyframe into a drawing or a drawing into a keyframe. They're distinct things. So far I've sung a lot of praises about Toon Boom, however, I didn't like everything about it. One thing that I had a major issue with was how it handles keyframing. One problem with having every single element available on your timeline all at once means that when you make a keyframe, it'll apply to everything. As a result, it's very likely you'll wind up adding a motion to a sub-element, such as on the face, when you didn't even mean to or need to. In Toon Boom as well, making any movement with the equivalent of the transform tool counts as making a new keyframe. In Flash, if you were to move something, it would apply throughout the exposure where that keyframe exists. This makes it pretty easy to tweak elements. In Toon Boom, however, to edit a keyframe, you have to make sure you are at where the keyframe starts and there alone. Going elsewhere will make instead a new keyframe. This might affect some users more than others. I knew it bugged me to a pretty big degree. I personally wouldn't have minded needing to click F6 just before adding in a new key position. Auto-generating keyframes makes some of the animation process feel excessive. Part of the reason why they do this is because you can select sub-elements, and selecting a sub-element will only make a keyframe for that sub-element even if you have the entire rig collapsed. I don't know if there is a holistic solution that can resolve most of this, unfortunately. Supposedly there are display groups that can help manage what you work with so you don't keyframe everything all at once, so you're not keyframing elements you didn't mean to, but I didn't have enough time in my trial to play with those. As far as tweening goes, Toon Boom has a few built-in options for easing, such as ease in, ease out, ease both, and various magnitudes of those as presets, but again, you have to make sure that you select a keyframe, not the motion graphic between keyframes, for it to apply. It also has a custom ease editor, allowing you to set a custom ease in and out, but to be honest, Flash's is oddly superior, allowing you to set up complex motions for a single tween. For instance, in Flash you could make something vibrate via a tween, but in Toon Boom you cannot do this. The last element that Flash actually has over Toon Boom is nested playback for symbols. For the record, Toon Boom does actually have symbols, and they're constructed just like you would do in Flash, however they are limited to single frame playback. As a result, loops are generally easier to set up in Flash, as you need to just set a starting point and you're done. In Toon Boom, you have to set it up manually, kind of defeating the purpose of using symbols. Instead, Toon Boom uses the ability to pace cycles, which requires you to know how long you need the cycle to be. This does make it a little bit easier to come in and out of a cycle, but still, if you need just like a generic loop, it's a little bit of a pain to set up. All in all, these can all be worked around with, but they're still common annoyances, and they did hamper my experience greatly. Two keyframing elements that Toon Boom does get exceedingly right, however, are tools such as Pose Copier, and also another tool I haven't mentioned yet called Quick Swap. I've already mentioned Pose Copier and how it helps you switch between angles and existing components, but Quick Swap is basically Keyframe Caddy. Quick Swap will display the drawing substitutions for a single drawing layer, which is very useful for lip syncing. And it has the added perk of tying itself to that layer, so you don't have to select the drawing in order to make any swaps. Note as well though that Quick Swap is not by default inside Toon Boom, you have to download an external third-party script for it. So one thing that Toon Boom does claim to do better than Flash, and it does to a degree, is it handles bones a lot better. If you have any experience in Flash, you should already know that the bone tool in Flash outright sucks and you shouldn't use it. It goes without saying. Any use you would get out of it, you could just as easily do manually. It does have the perk of adding inverse kinematics to an object, however, which is useful if you need to position an item based on its start and end points. But this also means you have to use the bone tool in the first place, which also locks you out of using other elements. Bones in Toon Boom, meanwhile, are, to no surprise, better than the low bar that's been set by Flash, but basic bones still leave a lot to be desired. While Toon Boom won't wind up having issues with overwriting and clipping and stuff like that, or at least not as many issues, if you try to do any shortening or deforming of the item, instead of scaling the item, it decides to break it. It's hideous looking. There's basically no reason to use the basic bone tool when the peg hierarchy already exists, unless you, desperately need a single drawing to bend or something. In short, I don't find basic bones worth using in either program. Harmony Premium actually does have 2 additional types of deformers, however, that are worth using and are huge selling points for Premium. It has curve and shape deformers. Curve deformers allow you to deform an item along a smooth path, which is great for adding a bend to something like an arm or a torso or even a tail. Shape deformers, meanwhile, are sort of like an After Effects puppet deformation. I use these to keep Cecil's sleeves attached to a robe as an example. They allow you to reshape an item around. And oddly enough, Toon Boom does have IKs, but they have nothing to do with bones like they do in Flash. Inverse kinematics are peg-based instead, and once you learn how to set them up, they can be very useful in specific scenarios, such as keeping a Spider-Girl's legs consistent. I wouldn't use these for everything, however they don't sacrifice any flexibility by locking you out of other techniques for animating. Nodes are another Premium-only feature, and they're what makes Toon Boom Premium so complex. Nodes are how you control things like transparency, compositing, specialty masking such as color masking for the eyes, auto-patching, lighting, and more. While in lower tiers of Toon Boom, you can assign similar effects to single layers and stuff, in nodes they completely change how they work. And they change them for the better. If you've dealt with 3D animation in the past, it may feel vaguely familiar to you. For instance, despite both of these limbs objects having solid outlines, when I move them over one another they patch together to look like a solid object. That's due to auto-patching and cutter nodes, using a pre-built node built by my friend TROY. Nodes add a whole new level to Toon Boom and largely are why you'd want to get Premium over the other 2 versions. Unfortunately, Toon Boom's biggest folly is how unintuitive it is. This especially is hampering to the node function. It's a pain to try and find answers to very specific questions online, and examples often don't demonstrate what you need to see. Official tutorials for Toon Boom leave a lot to be desired, and often wind up taking baby steps and handhold you the entire way. This is a little weird because Toon Boom markets itself a lot to existing animators. Documentation for elements like nodes and stuff is dated and often doesn't adequately describe what nodes do. Not to mention, it feels like there should be a short description inside the program available just by mousing over a node element itself. There are a few very good tutorials out there for Toon Boom for existing animators, but they are very hard to find. One in particular that I really liked was by the channel Onion Skin, which is a tutorial series specifically about transitioning from Flash to Toon Boom. If you're considering switching, you might want to follow it. The bottom line, should you switch to Toon Boom from Flash? As I said, I'm not going to make any sweeping recommendations on this topic. It's completely subjective. Toon Boom is objectively better, but that doesn't mean it's going to be more practical for you. You have to decide that for yourself. I tried Essentials about a year ago myself, and I actually wound up giving up on it. I tried it again recently, which started my recent foray into the program, and I made a commitment to stick with it and spend at least an hour a day just learning it. I burned through both of the remaining trials that I had. I started with Advanced, followed tutorials for a week, and then decided to skip ahead a bit and start my trial with Premium, which was hugely game-changing, because Premium has so much on top of Advanced that I don't know why they even sell Advanced in the first place. It should just be Essentials and Premium. As I've mentioned, I think the reason people sell Toon Boom so highly is because they haven't, especially for transitioning, is because the issues with Flash wound up rubbing them the wrong way or wound up affecting them more than it did other people such as myself. Or maybe they haven't learned some of the tricks that Flash has to offer. I've dealt with Flash for a lot. I've learned how to work around its shortcomings and stuff, and I've learned how to actually play them to my advantage. So it basically made it very difficult for me to convince myself to transition. The big reason for that is all the ground that I've covered in Flash, I have to now recover in Toon Boom in a much shorter time period. And if you're an animator as well, you might not have time to sit down and learn the program and stuff and simultaneously upkeep your output if you're relying on it as a source of income. You need to actually have a time period where you can actually work on it without having to worry about other things. I've spent almost 6 years working in Flash and learning tricks and learning little secrets and things like that and getting plugins and expanding my library of tools and assets and stuff like that. And I'm trying to relearn that stuff in just a month for Toon Boom. Namely because I only have 3 weeks for the trial. 3 weeks for the premium trial, that is. Because again, aside from learning the controls, Advanced trial was not useful at all to me. The only trial that was useful was premium. By far the biggest fault that Toon Boom has going for it is very unintuitive. It's very, very difficult to try and figure out how things work just naturally. You have to refer to tutorials, you have to refer to help sections, guides, and the other thing that's annoying about it is because it's so specialized, you're not going to find a lot of support for it. It's not even that common when it comes to professional use and stuff. Flash is still the king, and it's still commonly used in studios and things like that. And Flash honestly does get sold short. There's a lot of really well animated Flash cartoons that exist out there, just like there's a lot of really well animated Toon Boom ones. But if you're just learning animation and you're brand spanking new to it, and you're not actually transitioning at all, either program will work out for you. Just think about what you want to do and where you want to be in the industry. Because again, Flash is still widely used and it's not going away soon. It's going to be more common for group efforts, stuff like that. If you want to focus strictly on animation, and you want to focus more on production level stuff and basically kind of get the groundwork in so that way you can transition to higher tier programs later on, you might want to start with Toon Boom instead. If you're semi-experienced with Flash, it might be good to stay in the program that you're more comfortable in, though you might not feel comfortable with Flash to begin with. So the elements like Z-axis and color masking might actually be enough to pull you over from Flash to Toon Boom. Hell, even Essentials or Advanced might be enough for you. It's kind of complicated of a category because semi-experience covers a broad range of different types of animators. Particularly if you're rig-based, I don't know if it's necessarily worthwhile to switch to Advanced, because Premium is honestly where it's at. Meanwhile, if you're a frame-by-frame animator, you might actually enjoy using even just Essentials, or Advanced even pays off to a degree as well. Now, if you're highly experienced with Flash, like I am, or if you've used Flash for professional level productions and stuff, it admittedly is very hard to sell you to Toon Boom, because you have a lot of experience in a program that requires a lot of experience. And you basically have to give up a lot of that in order to switch. And it's not going to be comfortable, it's not going to be fun to switch, and it's going to take a very long time to switch. Probably longer than the trial will allow for. You have to know exactly what you want to get out of Toon Boom in order to warrant switching for yourself. Sometimes that might just mean Z-axes and being able to arrange items in 3D space is going to be enough for you. Maybe color masking is going to be enough to motivate you to switch. Maybe the node system is going to be what's required, along with the more complex deformers like curve and shape deformers. Keep in mind, a lot of the node map as well as a lot of the effects functionality is restricted to premium as well. So if you were to switch to advanced, the only thing you'd have going for it is the Z-axis elements and the ability to kind of like the way the library works as well. So maybe that's a perk. You also have the better drawing tools, of course. I think that goes without saying. But it's also worth remembering that the drawing tools still are far from perfect. And in general, Toon Boom seems to be less likely to crash, though I've worked with Flash for so long that I'm able to anticipate when it's going to crash and prevent it from crashing. The other thing also to consider is that when it comes to collaborative efforts, most people will still have Flash. And if you work in groups, you're probably going to want to make sure you're using what they're using. Animation schools are often teaching how to use Toon Boom, but Flash is still probably the most popular animation tool in the indie animation scene. In any case, what I would seriously recommend if you really want to try Toon Boom, keep in mind there's 3 versions of the program, and all of them have a trial that lasts 3 weeks. This means you can effectively get 9 weeks trialing the software. Just don't try to run 2 trials at once, otherwise they'll terminate the other one. If you want to do frame-by-frame stuff, you may want to try out just Essentials or Advanced. That might actually be enough for you, just because the better drawing tools exist, and otherwise most of the base functionality that Flash has is present. It should feel familiar enough that the transition won't be too rough. If you do more rig-based stuff like what I do, it's going to be a bit more time to switch over. I would use Essentials and Advanced just to familiarize yourself with the controls overall, and some of the basic functionality, and then switch over to Premium once you're ready to actually start rigging. Because Premium is so much different compared to Advanced. It's night and day. If and when you decide you want to learn the program, you need to make sure you commit to it hardcore and not back down when it gets difficult. You'll need to have a long period where, creatively, you can commit to learning it regularly even if it's just for an hour a day. You definitely will need to follow tutorials, I can guarantee it, and it will be frustrating when you have questions and all you can find are mundane answers from the Toon Boom forum or really long-winded baby steps videos from the official Toon Boom website when you're trying to find an answer to a very singular, specific problem. It's frustrating. As I've mentioned, there's still a few good tutorials out there, such as Onion Skin's Flash to Toon Boom tutorial, which if you're considering transitioning, you definitely should follow that. It's concise and to the point and will get you started much quicker than other tutorials out there. Just do keep in mind that it is a little bit dated, so some of the key bindings might be a little bit off. Hopefully that helps you make a decision. Again, I'd like to thank TROY for showing me some various useful tricks and helping hold my hand through this process, and also to Onion Skin because his tutorials are excellent and targeted specifically at people like me. And if all goes well for me, I should have more animations coming soon, and more regularly, if I'm able to get the program. Anyway, if you like my content, including the stuff that doesn't go up on YouTube, and are 18 or older, you might want to consider supporting me on Patreon. That way you can help me make more of it. I mean, you don't have to. Just throwing it out there. No pressure.